Snowflakes drifted across the narrow alpine pass of Col de l'Arche at almost 2,000 meters above sea level. The air was thin, bitter cold, and cracked under the thunder of distant mountain artillery. Below the ridges, German mountain troops of the 100 Gebirgsjäger Regiment crouched in foxholes carved into rock, listening. Then came the soft rattle of a small engine, wheels crunching over scree, a tiny silhouette creeping into view through the mist. It was a jeep, a quarter-ton 4-4 that the Germans had dismissed as a toy. Lieutenant Hans Klein, freezing behind his machine gun post, stared. He had just assumed that no vehicle could come here. Yet this toy climbed where tanks stalled, crawled where trucks feared to tread. Suddenly, supply lines above the ridges were no longer safe, and the Allied patrols were flowing through. In that moment, the tiny jeep reshaped the mountain war. 2 years earlier, in 1941, the little vehicle that astonished Lieutenant Klein had been born from necessity, not prestige. The U.S. Army had needed a light reconnaissance car, something small enough to maneuver through mud, forests, and mountain trails, yet strong enough to carry men, ammunition, or wounded soldiers. The requirements were impossible. 4-wheel drive, less than 3,300 pounds, able to climb steep grades and ford rivers, all in just 49 days of design time. 3 American companies answered the call: Bantam, Willys, and Ford. Bantam built the prototype, Willys refined the engine, and Ford contributed mass production efficiency. The result was the Willys MB and its twin, the Ford GPW, vehicles soon to be known simply as the Jeep. Powered by a 60-horsepower Go Devil engine, its torque was legendary. It could haul itself up slopes that seemed absurd for any vehicle on 4 wheels. To the soldiers, the Jeep was more than metal and rubber. It was a friend. They rode it through rain and shellfire, strapped stretchers to its hood, and nicknamed it everything from Peep to Goat. By 1943, nearly 100,000 units had rolled off American assembly lines, heading to North Africa, Sicily, and eventually Italy, the theater that would test it like no other. In the mountains of the Italian peninsula, the terrain defied even modern engineering. The Allies faced the Apennines and the Alps, endless ridges, switchbacks, and snow-choked passes. Tanks and trucks faltered, leaving entire battalions cut off. The Jeep, however, proved to be the only machine that could climb through the mud and rubble with supplies, stretchers, and hope. But before it earned respect, it faced ridicule. When the first Jeeps arrived in North Africa in late 1942, many officers dismissed them outright. British staff officers joked that they looked like something a farmer might use to herd sheep. German intelligence, after capturing a few, logged them as leichtes amerikanisches Personenkraftwagen, light passenger cars, unfit for serious combat. Even within the Allied ranks, there were doubts. The Jeep's short wheelbase made it twitchy at high speed, and its open design offered no armor or protection. Soldiers complained that one wrong turn could send it flipping over, and its canvas top barely kept out rain or sand. In Tunisia, the rough desert tore at tires, and engines clogged with dust. Mechanics called them tin donkeys. Yet out in the field, the truth emerged. Drivers learned how to coax the little machine across gullies and mine-scarred plains. Mechanics learned that the Jeep could be stripped, fixed, and running again in under an hour. In one North African convoy, a Jeep ran more than 400 miles with a cracked piston because no replacement could be found, and it still reached camp. Meanwhile, German troops began to take note. Captured Jeeps were repainted with crosses and put to use by the Wehrmacht for reconnaissance. One German officer reportedly remarked, "If we had one for every soldier, the war in Russia would have been different." Still, no one yet imagined what these toys would do when the front shifted north, into the towering mountains of Italy and the icy teeth of the Alps. Winter of 1944. The Gothic Line, Germany's last fortified defense across northern Italy, snaked through the Apennines, a brutal chain of ridges and ravines that seemed impassable. Snow choked the passes, mud swallowed boots and wheels. Artillery fire echoed endlessly across the slopes. The Allies needed to move men, food and ammunition through these mountains, but even mules faltered on the icy trails. That's when the Jeep earned its legend. In February, the 10th Mountain Division, newly arrived from Colorado, began testing Jeeps on slopes the Italians said no vehicle could climb. Corporal Robert Parker recalled one mission where his Jeep, loaded with radio gear and 2 wounded soldiers, ascended a goat trail so steep you could look down and see the sky. When the engine began to sputter from altitude, Parker slipped it into low range and kept crawling, foot by foot, until they reached the summit. The German positions on Monte Belvedere were stunned to see Allied Jeeps cresting ridgelines that no tank had ever approached. From their bunkers, mountain troops aimed their binoculars and muttered disbelief. Ein Spielzeugauto, one soldier wrote in his diary, a toy car. But the toy was hauling supplies, hauling the wounded and bringing artillery spotters right behind the front line. That night, Jeeps became lifelines. They dragged sleds of ammunition through snowstorms, ferried medics between shattered outposts, and carried the fallen down paths too narrow for stretchers. The sound of their engines, steady, unpretentious, unstoppable, became the pulse of the Allied advance. By spring 1945, as the war neared its end, the little 444 had climbed beyond the Apennines, toward the Alps themselves, where it would once again surprise its enemies. April 1945, northern Italy. Snow still dusted the peaks as the German army retreated into the last bastion of the Alps. The Allies, American, British and Italian partisans, needed to chase them through terrain that should have favored only mountain troops and pack animals. Yet at the foot of the mountains, long lines of Willys Jeeps waited, engines idling in the freezing dawn. Major William Darby of the 10th Mountain Division authorized what seemed absurd, to send jeeps across the Alpine passes, towing sleds and trailers, even dismantled artillery pieces. To make it possible, engineers modified the vehicles on the spot. Tires were fitted with chains, fuel cans were strapped to the sides, canvas tops were torn off to lighten weight. Soldiers joked that if they could fit wings, they would. As the convoy climbed the narrow pass near the Brenner border, they encountered obstacles no map had warned of: collapsed bridges, avalanches, walls of stone. Crews improvised. Jeeps were hitched to ropes, and men pushed them up inclines by sheer muscle. When one skidded off the icy track, another winched it back up with a pulley made from tent poles and ammunition belts. The Germans, watching from high positions, were stunned. They had assumed the mountains would stall the advance for weeks. Instead, Allied patrols appeared within days, jeeps grinding through snowfields at altitudes near 2,000 meters. Gebirgsjäger units radioed in disbelief that small American cars were crossing routes once reserved for mules and climbers. By April the 30th, jeeps had reached the Austrian border. They carried scouts, engineers, and surrender envoys through passes still echoing with artillery. The vehicle that began as a humble reconnaissance car had become a mountain conqueror, bridging the unbridgeable. By the time the Alps were behind them, the Jeep had become more than just a vehicle. It was the physical embodiment of Allied mobility. Over 640,000 had been produced by war's end, built not only in America, but under license in Canada and assembled in Britain and France. They moved through every climate imaginable, from the sands of North Africa to the jungles of Burma, from the hedgerows of Normandy to the frozen hills of Korea years later. In Italy, mountain patrols had discovered new uses daily. Some fitted the jeeps with recoilless rifles, others mounted stretchers and Red Cross flags, turning them into mobile ambulances. When the roads were bombed, jeeps became bridges themselves, driven into craters and used as platforms for planks so trucks could pass. Supply officers joked that the vehicle could carry anything but dignity. The Germans, once derisive, had come to envy its presence. General Erwin Rommel reportedly studied captured models in North Africa, admiring their simplicity. "If I had 10,000 of these," he told one officer, "I could win this war." Even post-war engineers in Europe used Jeeps as blueprints for their own designs. The British Land Rover, the Soviet Gaz, and the French Hotchkiss M201 all trace their lineage to it. Yet the machine's real impact lay in its symbolism. It represented ingenuity over arrogance, proof that power didn't always need armor. A 2,000-pound toy, built by ordinary factory workers, had crossed the Alps, climbed into history, and humbled an empire that worshipped steel and might. When Germany finally surrendered in May 1945, Allied columns rolled triumphantly through mountain villages, jeep engines humming between stone walls still pockmarked by shrapnel. Children waved, soldiers smiled wearily, and some jeeps carried the wounded who had survived the climb from Cassino to the Brenner Pass. The same vehicles that once struggled through North African sand now rumbled over Alpine snow, their tires scarred, paint chipped, headlights patched with tape. A German officer captured near Innsbruck reportedly muttered, half in admiration and half in disbelief, "So this is the little car that beat us." He wasn't wrong. The Jeep had embodied everything the Allied war effort represented: adaptability, collaboration and resilience. It had no armor, no heavy gun, and no grandeur. But it was everywhere. It carried generals and privates, chaplains and medics, ammunition and hope. It made the front line move faster than strategy predicted, and it gave exhausted soldiers a feeling that no obstacle was permanent. Long after the war, Jeeps found their way back into civilian life, repainted and repurposed for farms, forests and roads that were once battlefields. They became symbols of freedom and endurance, reminders that strength can come in the smallest of forms. And somewhere in the Alps, if the wind is quiet enough, one might still imagine the faint growl of that little engine climbing toward the clouds, proving that even a so-called toy could carry the weight of a world at war.